A certain virus, which I will not name because I don't want to be demonetized, has shook the world and the computer industry wasn't immune. Combined with the high tariffs in January, some computer components just aren't as affordable as they used to be. Fortunately, you can still build yourself a powerful streaming and gaming computer to keep you company during this quarantine season. Several iterations later, and with the help of Micro Center, I give you a beast gaming computer that you can afford during quarantine, in parentheses. But first, a message from our sponsor. Trying to save money for your next PC build, but those odd jobs just aren't cutting it? Well, don't fear, Gizmodo has you covered. If you have any old electronics laying around that you don't need and want a guaranteed price for them, use Gizmodo to sell. My little brother had a seriously broken iPhone 7 Plus that we were able to sell on Gizmodo and get some money within a few days. They even paid for shipping too. So try out Gizmodo, link in the description. Before we start this build, let's get a few things out of the way. Number one, this $500 build emphasizes efficiency. I'm a budget tech YouTuber, so I often go for the cheapest yet most practical option available. Obviously, this isn't the cheapest computer that I've built on this channel, but it has one of the best price to performance at the time when I bought it. This means it won't have super flashy lights, but you can expect it to perform very, very well. You can always add those lights extras later. Secondly, we're using all new parts. I have a plethora of used builds on the channel that you can check out if you do want to go into the used market. But if it's your first time building a computer, first, second, maybe third, then I definitely recommend new parts, and this video is mostly for you. Thirdly, prices are volatile, especially right now. Prices change all the time. When I initially ordered these parts earlier in the year, they were a lot different in prices than what you guys might see in the description. If they simply don't fit in the build anymore, then I'll go over any alternatives that will, any changes that it will make, and the performance you can get out of it. Fourthly, 1080p 60 FPS gaming and streaming is totally possible on this computer. At the time of recording, I really gotta emphasize that. You'll see later on, but you'll be able to get 1080p 60 FPS on basically any title out there right now, and even up to 120 FPS stable in lighter esports titles like CSGO, for example. And lastly, you can skip to the end if you want to see the benchmarks and the build tutorial. If you want to be that guy, you totally can skip to the timestamp on screen to get to the benchmarks and the tutorial, but hopefully I'm engaging enough and you love me enough to watch the entire video. If you totally hate me, no hard feelings. I totally understand. I want to say a big thank you to Micro Center for making this possible. They helped out with the power supply, the SSD, and the motherboard, and this video would not have been possible without them. So make sure you check out the links to their site in the description below and show them some love on Twitter. Tell them I sent you and ask them to build a Micro Center in your city if you don't already have one. Micro Center, if you're watching this, I'm sorry in advance for the spam you're gonna get. All right, let's head into the parts. The total for everything here was $484 when I bought it, but it's gonna be a little bit over $500 because of said virus and also because of tariffs that have changed prices. So just keep that in mind. The CPU we have is the Ryzen 5 1600AF for 85 bucks. It's 6 cores and 12 threads. This processor performs closely to a Ryzen 5 2600, but it's a little bit cheaper. It's perfect for gaming, multitasking, and streaming. It's on the AM4 platform, so you can upgrade to a Ryzen 7 or a Ryzen 9 in the future. The motherboard is the Asus Prime B450A CSM that I got for 60 bucks on clearance at Micro Center. This is a basic B450 board, and it doesn't have the best voltage regulators for your CPU, but Ryzen is very efficient, so you won't have any problem with a Ryzen 3 or a Ryzen 5 CPU. It also supports CPU overclocking if you're interested. Sadly, it does go for 80 bucks right now, which I don't recommend. Instead, get an ASROCK B450M Pro 4 if you're going to spend $80. If you want something cheaper, the B450M HDV is the cheapest B450 motherboard on the market. If you want something even cheaper than that, the Gigabyte A320M S2H isn't a bad option for $60. Both motherboards won't have any problems with Ryzen 5 processors. Make sure you get at least 8 gigs of DDR4 memory in dual channel, meaning that you have two 4GB sticks like you see here. You really want 2666 MHz speed or higher, but if you can't afford that, you can get 2400 and just overclock it. I picked up 8 gigs of DDR4 2666 Crucial Ballistics in dual channel. Whew, that was a mouthful, for $34. For storage, make sure you pick up an SSD because it will make your entire experience so much snappier. The minimum amount I recommend is 240 gigs. My inland model was only $29 when I bought it, but sadly, the price is now almost $40. There is no way around this, so just buy the cheapest SSD that fits your storage needs. My current one doesn't have a DRAM cache, but that's perfectly okay for most people. It's still going to be pretty snappy. If you want more storage in the future, you can always add more. The video card that I chose is the GTX 1660. It's a pretty awesome card, and I'm glad I was able to fit it into a $500 computer. I bought mine for $200, and it's the Zotac dual fan model. The exact model goes for around $220 now, but there are single fan models that you can buy for around $190. They should provide decent thermals and noise levels based on reviews that I've personally read online. If that's too expensive, a GTX 1650 Super is around $160, and it's only about 15% slower than the 1660. The reason we're going NVIDIA here is because their streaming algorithm is miles ahead of AMD, just in case we need to use it in the future. I bought a Thermaltake Smart 500 watt power supply for $40 at Micro Center. Nowadays, you can't find a half-decent power supply under $50. The EVGA 450 watt BV is an option for $50, but in an ideal world, it's way more expensive than I could ever recommend. Still, it's really all we can use at the moment. It can power this system just fine, but it's probably the bare minimum I recommend. And lastly, we have the case. I got the Deepcool Matrexx 30. This case seems perfect on paper, but building in it wasn't as beginner friendly as I had hoped. While it's not an awful choice for $35, I recommend the Cougar MX330, Thermaltake H17, or the Thermaltake H18 instead. This case does have tempered glass and decent natural airflow, but only has one rear fan, and the motherboard installation is a bit wonky. I seem to always forget this part in every other build video, but I made sure that I remembered it here. For my computers, I use wired Ethernet connection. Now, if you're not close to your router, then Wi-Fi is still an option, and I recommend a PCIe Wi-Fi card. I've linked some in the description below. I built this entire computer, overclocked it, tested it, and installed drivers on stream. If you want the full uncut video, then check out my Twitch, twitch.tv/OzTalksHW for the VOD. Okay, so let's build the computer. First, we need to install everything on the motherboard. Take your CPU, motherboard, I/O plate, and cables out of their boxes. Place the motherboard on top of the motherboard box. Let's install the CPU. Lift the lever on the motherboard holding the CPU socket. Make sure the Ryzen name is directly under the CPU socket ridge. Gently place the CPU into the socket. It should fall right into place. Then pull the lever down. Unscrew the heatsink holders on the left and right side of the CPU socket with a Phillips head screwdriver. Take out the CPU cooler from the Ryzen box. If you bought the CPU new, it will come with pre-applied thermal paste. Make sure the ejected AMD logo on the top of the cooler is pointing away from the RAM slots like so. Line up the cooler with the mounting holes and screw them in an X pattern. Plug the CPU into the CPU fan header on the motherboard. Take your DDR4 memory out of its packaging. You see the notches on the RAM sticks? We want those to line up with the notches on the motherboard slots. Pull back the motherboard slot levers, line up the DDR4 memory notches, and press firmly on the ends of the DDR4 memory sticks. You should hear a click on both ends. If you have 4 RAM slots, install the RAM on every other slot. Start on the slot furthest away from the CPU. The motherboard is now ready for installation, so let's prepare the case. Untie all the case cables and the baggie. The baggie has all your necessary screws for installation, so don't lose that, and consult the manual for knowing which screws are used where. Take off both side panels of your case. Get your I/O shield and install it on the rear of your case. You'll just need to use pressure to get it working. My motherboard was on clearance and didn't come with any I/O plate, so here's an example of what it should look like. Thank you Tech by Matt for the clear video instruction. Go check him out. Get your motherboard and line it up with your I/O shield so the ports fit. Get your graphics card and place it near but not into the PCIe slot highlighted. Take note of which GPU I/O brackets we must remove from the case to install the video card. This case has a screw that holds them all together, so unscrew that and then pull out the GPU I/O brackets that line up with your video card. In this case, it's the middle two. With your motherboard still in the case, take note of the screw holes in your motherboard. This is where we need to install the motherboard standoffs and screw in the motherboard. This case has most of the standoffs pre-installed, but we will install it in a few extra places for more security. Install the motherboard standoffs, but not the motherboard. Unbox your power supply. Make sure the fan is facing downwards and place it at the bottom of the case. Get the 4 power supply screws and screw the power supply into place. Route the power supply cables through the big case hole closest to the power supply at the bottom. Route the CPU cable through the big motherboard tray hole at the back. Route the 24-pin motherboard cable through the curvy diamond hole on the right. Route the PCIe 6-pin cable inside a power cable through the cutout directly below the curvy diamond hole. Take the case cables and route it from the front of the case to the back of the case through the same hole. Then route them from the back of the case to the front of the case through the bottom hole where all the power supply cables are. Now it's time to install the motherboard. Line up the motherboard with the I/O plate and the standoffs and screw everything in. To install the SSD, get your SATA data cable that was found in your motherboard box. Plug one end into the smaller L-shaped port on your SSD. Get the SATA power supply cable and plug that into the fat L-shaped port at the back of your SSD. Now slide the SSD with the port side facing the case into the bay on the right side of your case. Let's plug in most of the cables. Take your 24-pin connector with the clip facing away from the motherboard center and plug it directly into the 24-pin plug on the right side of the motherboard. You might need to use some force. That's okay. Plug the CPU 4 or 8-pin in the same way with the clip facing away from the motherboard center. Now it's time for the front panel connectors. These are used for the buttons on the front of the case as well as the USB ports. The front panel header has 9 pins with a no connection pin and is located at the very bottom of the case. It's best if we use a diagram to show how to install this, so pause here for as long as you need. The diagram is also found in your motherboard manual. Plug your power header to pins 6 and 8, your power LED pins to 2 and 4, the hard drive LED pins to 1 and 3, and the reset pins to 5 and 7. Take the USB 3.0 cable, it's the fat wide one, and plug it into its header. Line up the notches. Plug in your USB headers and your audio header. They're also located at the bottom of the motherboard and their pins look like this. Lastly, take your case fan on the left and install it directly into one of the fan headers. Alright, so we're almost done. Let's install the graphics card. Make sure the video inputs are pointing towards the rear case fan. With the fans facing towards the bottom of the case, line up the GPU with your PCIe slot and the I/O brackets. Push until you hear a click. Now take your PCIe 6+2 pin power connector and plug it into the video card. This part is optional, but if you have a PCIe Wi-Fi card, you will install it the same way you installed the video card, but in the slot below it. Make sure you remove one of the I/O ports on the left side of the case before you do so. Install the top section of the video I/O shield to make sure the video card and the Wi-Fi card, if applicable, are secure. I linked the guide to installing Windows below, so you can just follow that. If you want to overclock your memory and your RAM, then check out my Twitch VOD. I overclock the entire system live and uncut, so you can see all the details and how I went through the entire process. So now that your computer is fully built and you've installed Windows, go play some games. Like, this is the entire reason why you built it. In case you aren't following the guide yet and you're still debating which parts you should get, here are some benchmarks of the games that I played, as well as some streaming benchmarks too. This video was a lot of work, but I think it was worth it. So if you're looking for an affordable new gaming computer for yourself, your coworker, your friend, a family member, share this video with them. Also, let me know if the build guide tutorial section was helpful. If you guys want to see more of that, it was a lot of work, but if I get a lot of people saying that it really helped them out, then I'll be sure to add it into future new guides. Like always, you don't need a lot of money to get into PC gaming, PC streaming, even in the midst of a pandemic. I'm not downplaying the pandemic in any manner whatsoever, but you should make use of the cards that you're dealt with. If you're gonna be inside all day, why not enjoy it playing video games, Minecraft, with the boys, you know? If you guys have any ideas to improve this computer, then just comment them down below and I'll heart the ones that I think are pretty decent upgrades or side grades or changes, whatever, and hopefully we can spark more conversation in the comment section too. Besides that, make sure you follow me on all socials. That includes Twitter, Insta, Twitch, Facebook, and I think that's it. Yeah, at OzTalksHW on everything, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.